Thank you. The first item of business this afternoon is portfolio questions, and the portfolio this afternoon, first portfolio is Constitution, External Affairs and Culture and Parliamentary Business. And at question number 1, I call Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what discussions it has had with UK Government Ministers regarding the devolution of additional powers to the Scottish Parliament, including those over alcohol and tobacco duty.
Cabinet Secretary Angus Robertson.
May I begin by paying tribute to one of Scotland's greatest cultural figures, Richard DeMarco. Together with the convener of the Culture Committee, Claire Adamson, we attended an event yesterday here at the Scottish Parliament where he was recognised as the Scottish European of the Year, and I'm sure I speak for all members and parties in the Scottish Parliament in congratulating him and pay tribute to his remarkable contribution to culture in Scotland and Europe. In answer to Kenneth Gibson's question, ultimately we believe that Scotland should be an independent country with full control over all the powers we need to grow our economy. Decisions that affect Scotland should be made by the people who live here. Scotland contributes a disproportionate amount to the Treasury relative to the rest of the UK through alcohol and tobacco duty, and whilst we have not had discussions specifically on the devolution of alcohol and tobacco duty, we have consistently called for full devolution of income tax and VAT alongside national insurance contributions and capital gains tax to be considered as a priority.
Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, and I would add obviously corporation tax to that too. In thanking the Minister for his reply, I would add that Scottish Ministers previously suggested devolving alcohol excise duty in the Scotland Bill specifically. However, this was ignored by the UK Government. The Office for Budget Responsibility estimates that alcohol duties will raise £13 billion across the UK this year, with £8.1 billion raised through tobacco duties. And as the Cabinet Secretary said, a disproportionate amount of which will be collected in Scotland. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree that devolving such duties would allow Scottish Ministers to have greater resources to mitigate the damage inflicted on health and the economy by tobacco and alcohol?
Cabinet Secretary.
I do agree with Kenneth Gibson. It's clear that devolving additional tax powers would give the Scottish Government greater resources to tackle the health harms caused by tobacco and alcohol, which remain a significant public health challenge. Disappointingly, our calls for the disparity in alcohol duty to be addressed in this budget went unheard. Greater control over taxation would ensure that the Scottish Government could design a system that better tackles public health challenges while supporting Scottish businesses and industry where appropriate.
Supplementary, Murdo Fraser.
Thank you. Can I remind the Chamber of my register of interest in relation to the Scotch Whisky Association? Can I agree with the Cabinet Secretary in relation to his remarks about Richard DeMarco and congratulate him on his well-deserved award? But in relation to the substance of the question, while I agree with Mr Gibson about the negative impact on the Scottish economy of the Chancellor's increase in alcohol duty, which was very unfortunate and very unwelcome. In relation to devolution, I have to say that I'm not sure the Scottish Government's track record is so tremendous when it comes to supporting the spirits industry, given the introduction of minimum unit pricing and also the plans that were brought forward in terms of alcohol marketing, which would have seen, for example, distilleries unable to advertise tours due to the draconian proposals being brought forward. Can the Cabinet Secretary update us as to where exactly we now stand with that?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I note that Murdo Fraser didn't raise one of the most significant challenges which the whisky industry faces, which relates to tariffs. And I would hope he would join with the Scottish Government in endorsing the work of the First Minister and hope that the United Kingdom Government is doing all that it can in discussions with the US Government, because, of course, the Scotch whisky industry that he raised and in their American colleagues in Discus are working very hard to make sure that we reduce the threat from tariffs. There's a balancing act to be struck when judging questions around alcohol duties, but also public health harms. I think the Scottish Government's got it right, and we will be doing all that we can to deal with threats to the likes of the whisky industry through tariffs, and we'd be grateful to have the support of all parties in the Chamber.
Question number 2, Edward Mountain.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how many freedom of information requests that it has received during the current parliamentary session that have subsequently been appealed by the requester.
Minister Graham Day.
Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government has received approximately 25,000 FOI requests during this session. Our records show that we have been notified by the Scottish Information Commissioner of approximately 310 appeal cases arising from requests made during this current session of the Parliament, which is less than 1.5%. The Scottish Government is currently responding to over 95% of requests on time, and that performance has been recognised by the Commissioner. This has been achieved against a backdrop of rising request numbers, which have risen from approximately approximately 4,500 in 2022 to over 5,500 in 2024, a figure already surpassed for the current year.
Edward Mountain.
And I thank the Minister for that answer. A lot of people feel that getting information from the Scottish Government is difficult. For example, after asking the Scottish Government numerous times a simple question of when the Cabinet Secretary for Climate Action and Energy agreed to visit Japan, I was directed to Scottish Enterprise, a government body. Scottish Enterprise have been evasive and refused to answer the question, and I've had to appeal their response. I have asked the question 52 working days ago to ascertain when Gillian Martin agreed to visit Japan. Will the Minister prove me wrong and provide an answer? Because failing to do so will further prove the government's evasive nature when it comes to the release of information.
Minister.
Well, I don't accept the general premise that Edward Mountain advances, and I don't believe that the numbers that I've cited, and I can cite other numbers around the Scottish Government's responsiveness to FOI requests would bear out the point he makes. However, on the specific issue he raises, I will undertake to look into that and come back to him.
Question number 3, Miles Briggs.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. And can I associate myself with the warm congratulations to Ricky DeMarco as well, to ask the Scottish Government what discussions the Culture Secretary has had with the Finance and Local Government Secretaries regarding providing support to Edinburgh in dealing with the pressures of holding major annual cultural events and royal visits, including reintroduction of the Capital City Supplement.
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank Miles Briggs for his question. The Cabinet Secretary for Finance and Local Government and I regularly discuss financial matters relating to local government and the culture sector, which is on track to receive an extra £100 million by 2028-29. This year, councils, including Edinburgh, received a record £15.1 billion, up 5.5% in real terms. Edinburgh has also had additional funding for its capital city status since 2008-09, now £3.9 million a year. From summer 2026, the Tourism Visitor Levy will also provide significant new revenue to help the city manage the pressures of major cultural events and royal visits.
Miles Briggs.
Thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. As a fellow Edinburgh MSP, he will be acutely aware of the extra pressures which Edinburgh is under due to these annual cultural events such as the Edinburgh Festivals and also Royal Week, as well as other civic events, national civic events. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary if he will agree to organise a funding summit with all interested partners to consider these growing pressures facing the capital? He will be acutely aware of the complaints over refuge collections not being able to be delivered, and also looking towards how we can plan public services better during these events.
Cabinet Secretary.
It's a very interesting idea. I think Miles Briggs is aware that I have convened now a standing strategic partnership involving Scotland's festivals, including a number from Edinburgh. And some of the challenges that exist in Edinburgh are felt in the rest of the country as well. I've also been in dialogue with the City of Edinburgh Council recently in relation to festival matters. So I'm open to suggestions, and of course we're approaching budget setting. So if Miles Briggs has any very specific proposals that he wants to make, and indeed how we would wish to pay for it, I'm open to receiving that. So I look forward to having that contribution from him in the weeks ahead.
Question number 4, Hamza Youssef.
To ask the Scottish Government what action it is taking in partnership with cultural institutions following this Parliament's agreeing the motion S6M 18686 on the 3rd of September, which called for boycotts targeted at the State of Israel.
Cabinet Secretary.
May I thank Hamza Youssef for his question. We take the motion of the 3rd of September very seriously, and while, since it passed, a ceasefire has been agreed, it has not yet brought the peace that will end the bloodshed, and that's why we continue to take very seriously the terms of the motion on matters such as boycotts. Clearly, our cultural institutions are bodies independent of government, but I am clear in my expectations that all institutions in every part of Scottish public life should abide by the intent of September's motion passed here in the Scottish Parliament. For the Scottish Government's part, we have implemented a range of economic and humanitarian measures in direct response to the motion as the most direct and effective response available to us within our delegated powers.
Hamza Youssef.
126. That's how many children have been killed in Gaza since the so-called ceasefire was announced in October, according to Amnesty International. In the West Bank, summary executions, settler violence, land theft continues with absolute impunity. Israel is operating as a rogue state with no respect, let alone adherence, to international law. Cabinet Secretary, as you rightly say, we need action, not simply statements of condemnation. So will the Cabinet Secretary do everything that is in his power to ensure cultural institutions do not collaborate with the State of Israel under the Netanyahu regime and treat Israel as we once treated the apartheid regime of South Africa?
Cabinet Secretary.
The continued bloodshed, not least of 136 Palestinian children, is absolutely abhorrent, and as members we will be aware that the First Minister has called on the UK Government to join South Africa's case at the International Court of Justice. And while cultural institutions are clearly independent bodies, I fully expect all publicly funded bodies to act in accordance with published Scottish Government and related regulatory frameworks that place respect for human rights and the rule of international law at their core. We will continue to give our voice to calls for a two-state solution so that we can have a peaceful future for Palestine and for Israel.
Supplementary, John Mason.
Thank you. If we're going to be consistent and we're going to have boycotts against Israel, should we not be having boycotts against other countries? And I think particularly of China, where there's been an appalling human rights record against Christians, Muslims, Tibetans. The list goes on and on. Or are we just picking on Israel because it's small and it's Jewish?
Cabinet Secretary.
No, I don't agree with the comparison, and this chamber and this government, and I think all members of this chamber, have condemned Russia's aggression against Ukraine, and it is the position of the United Kingdom government and supported by the Scottish government that there should be a boycott of Russian firms. So clearly this is not just aimed at one country, that there are other parts of the world where these issues should be considered is a statement of fact, and if Mr Mason wants to draw any issues to the Scottish Government's attention, I'd be grateful for that.
Question number 5, Michael Mara.
To ask the Scottish Government what discussions the Culture Secretary has had with ministerial colleagues regarding support available to cultural institutions for energy efficiency measures, in light of reports that Dundee Rep and other similar cultural bodies that operate as wholly owned trading subsidiaries have been unable to access the SME loan and cashback scheme.
Cabinet Secretary.
With the recent publication of the draft climate change plan, ministers have discussed energy efficiency measures and carbon emissions reductions across all sectors of Scotland's economy, and I welcome the efforts of Dundee Rep Theatre and other similar organisations to reduce their carbon emissions and to contribute towards meeting Scotland's net zero targets. The SME loan and cashback scheme continues to support many businesses across Scotland in all sectors, and we are currently reviewing the terms and the conditions of the scheme to make sure that support can be accessed as widely as possible.
Michael Mara.
Well, I do welcome that, because the Cabinet Secretary knows that Creative Scotland require building-based charities like Dundee Rep to adapt their premises to improve energy efficiency. But the Rep is currently prevented from accessing that scheme because of the situation that I describe. I don't believe that this was the intended effect from the Government and how it was established. And the eligibility criteria that is under review is absolutely essential to make that change, to allow them to make this investment which they wish to make. Can I have a commitment from the Cabinet Secretary that the review will take this strongly on board and will make sure that institutions like the Rep, and there will be institutions across the country in this situation, can access that scheme to make the necessary changes?
Cabinet Secretary.
I unequivocally give him that assurance. Not only that, I know he's been in correspondence with colleagues, so this is not the first time that he and other members have raised this. He makes a point about the way in which unintended consequences sometimes play a role in things. I give him the assurance, as I have already said, that we are currently reviewing the terms and conditions of the scheme to make sure that support can be accessed as widely as possible. I think the timing of his question is very good, because it will help those looking very closely at any potential changes will be encouraged to look at examples like the Dundee Rep to see if it's possible to make any necessary adjustments.
Question number 6, Rona Mackay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how it supports cultural initiatives in Eastern Bartonshire, such as Acorn Shed Music, to expand opportunities for participation in the arts across all age groups.
Cabinet Secretary.
In 2025-26, Creative Scotland provided £30,000 to We Make Music instrument libraries from the Youth Music Initiative to establish a new instrument lending library in East Dunbartonshire and to allow children and young people to develop their music making outside of school. We value culture culture in all forms, which is why we increased the culture budget by over £34 million in 25-26 as part of our commitment to an additional £100 million per year by 28-29. And in widening access to culture is central to the culture strategy, and the Scottish Government supports community-based participative arts activities, including through the Youth Music Initiative.
Rona Mackay.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. Acorn Shed Music in Eastern Berkshire is a fantastic organisation showing how storytelling and songwriting can connect people of all ages, including those living with dementia and their carers. How will the Government ensure that innovative community arts organisations like Acorn Shed Music receive sustainable support so their impact is not limited by short-term funding?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I can give Rona Mackay the assurance that a central ambition of the culture strategy is for everyone to experience the transformative potential of culture. The Culture Collective and Creative Communities Scotland programmes support community-engaged creative activity driven by the communities they are based in to shape the future cultural life of Scotland. Applications for the £3 million Culture Collective Open Fund 26 and the £320,000 Creative Communities Scotland Fund 26 are currently being assessed, and the 5 national performing companies who are funded directly by the Scottish Government work with local communities across Scotland.
Supplementary, Pam Gozo.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As an MSP representing Eastern Berkshire, I have met with representatives from many amazing organisations specialising in arts such as Creative Spark, Theatre Arts, Kirky Cinema and many more which do fantastic work involving people of all ages. One key theme is the need for long-term sustainable funding. Will the Cabinet Secretary commit to establishing a stable, long-term funding framework rather than relying on short-term, project-by-project allocations that sometimes fail to generate sustainable benefits?
Cabinet Secretary.
This is indeed the driver behind the introduction of multi-year funding. It's exactly that point, to fund more organisations and to do so on a longer basis than an annual application process. There are other pots of funding, as I've outlined, that can be accessed, but if there are organisations that might be in a position to access multi-year funding, I would advise her to communicate that. I'm sure they're aware of that, but my hope is that more cultural organisations in all parts of the country will make use of multi-year funding, because I believe its introduction is transformational for the culture sector, and I have no doubt that there will be organisations in her region that will be keen to make use of that.
Question number 7, Claire Adamson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and apologies to the Chamber for being late today. Can I ask the Scottish Government what assessment it has made of the impact of the UK-EU Trade and Cooperation Agreement on touring artists in Scotland, including any plans for discussion with the UK Government on this matter in advance of the forthcoming review of the TCA?
Cabinet Secretary.
Stakeholders have been clear that the lack of mobility provisions for touring artists in the TCA is making it harder to reach new audiences, harder to generate income, harder to collaborate across borders and harder to showcase internationally. It is critical that an agreement on cultural mobility is prioritised. I have frequently pressed for this issue to be prioritised in UK Government negotiations with the European Union, and I will continue to urge my UK counterparts to use the review, existing TCA structures and wider negotiations to seek progress on the issue, including the next Culture and Creative Industries Interministerial Group.
Claire Adamson.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his answer. This has had a dramatic impact on particularly small artists, not the big arena of artists, but smaller touring artists, but also in our national performing companies in particular. We have lost so much since Brexit, which of course Scotland didn't vote for. And while there are opportunities possibly ahead, does he agree that the only way back to the full benefits of the EU is as an independent Scotland in Europe?
Cabinet Secretary.
I do agree, and that's why Member States of the European Union enjoy the benefits of free movement of people, including the culture sector. The value of cross-border cultural exchange cannot be overestimated. The Creative Europe programme, as an example, represents one of the best means to facilitate this, given its unique focus on transnational cultural connections. It is therefore disappointing that the UK Government has not sought participation in this valuable programme. On Monday, when I was in London, I raised this directly with Ian Murray at the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, and would hope that the UK Government would understand the advantages of the UK again being part of the Creative Europe programme. Of course, there is no substitute for being an independent member state of the European Union.
Question number 8, Liam Kerr.
To ask the Scottish Government what its response is to the recently published independent review of Creative Scotland.
Cabinet Secretary.
I welcome the review and the opportunity it provides for Creative Scotland to deliver on the ambition of the evolving sector with more efficiency, transparency and impact, and consideration is being given to the recommendations, and Parliament will be updated in due course. Ensuring that the support infrastructure for the culture sector is as effective as possible is vital, as the Scottish Government continues to deliver on our commitment to increase the culture budget by £100 million. I am grateful to Angela Leach and her team and all those who contributed views to the review for their work.
Liam Kerr.
Creative Scotland receives almost £90 million of taxpayers' money each year, and the independent review points to excessive bureaucracy, weak leadership, no effective performance monitoring. The Cabinet Secretary has been in post for years now. So when did he become aware of the systemic failures occurring in a body directly within his ambit, and having failed to involve himself thus far, what remedial action is he taking?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, first off, can I pay tribute to Creative Scotland for introducing multi-year funding? It's an absolutely transformational shift in the culture sector, and I think Liam Kerr agrees that that is a good thing. And I think, having done that, Creative Scotland is now in a position to take seriously the suggestions that have been made as part of this review. More than 450 people and organisations took part in it. If Liam Kerr did, I'm sorry, I haven't seen his contribution, his suggestions. If he has any contributions that he passed on to the review that he would wish me to look at closely, I'd be delighted to see those.
And supplementary, Neil Bibby.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Firstly, I join the Cabinet Secretary, Mr Fraser, in congratulating Richard DeMarco on his well-deserved award and recognition. On the Creative Scotland review, I met with representatives from the creative sector who raised concerns about the series of consultation events taking part in the summer, which meant many could not participate due to them being on holiday. Concerns have also been expressed to me that there was a lack of representation from more marginalised groups, for example, people from black and minority ethnic backgrounds, and a request for a further consultation event was refused. Is the Cabinet Secretary aware of these concerns and feedback, and what steps will he take to ensure the most marginalised voices are not excluded from decisions on the future of Creative Scotland?
Cabinet Secretary.
So firstly, I am aware of the issues because they were shared with me at the time that no doubt they were sent to Mr Bibby. I'm also aware that Angela Leach and her team added on extra events so that people could take part as part of the review process. I can give an absolute assurance that marginalised groups who feel that their voice has not been heard, or they want to make additional suggestions, as Creative Scotland, the Scottish Government and partners such as our enterprise companies consider the review contents, and I would encourage them through Mr Bibby and indeed MSPs across the Chamber, please to pass on their suggestions, whether suggestions were made during the formal part of the process or after that, because of course we're thinking about the culture sector more broadly and not just Creative Scotland. I can give him the assurance that their views will be taken very seriously.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. That concludes portfolio questions on Constitution, External Affairs and Culture and Parliamentary Business. Point of order, Douglas Ross.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I apologise for not giving you prior notice of this point of order, but I seek your guidance. Members asking questions must be in their place at the start of a session, and if they are not, even by a small amount of time, they must apologise, as we heard from Claire Adamson. You also have to remain in the chamber for the entirety of the portfolio questions. I know the Minister for Parliamentary Business, Graham Day, answered the question from Edward Mountain today and then walked out midway through the session. So do the same rules apply to ministers as apply to backbench MSPs, that they should remain in the chamber for the entirety of the session in which they are answering questions?
I thank Douglas Ross for his point of order. In fact, I had just noted myself from the Chair that the Minister for Parliamentary Business had vacated his seat, notwithstanding that the portfolio question time had not completed. and I have actually had a word with the clerk to look into that matter further, and that is what we will now do. I hope that responds to Mr Ross's question. Excuse my voice. We will now move on to the next item of business, which is the second portfolio, which is Justice and Home Affairs. And I would remind members that questions 6 and 7 are grouped together, and therefore I shall take any supplementaries on these questions after both have been answered. And at question number 1, I call Stuart McMillan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on any progress that has been made to replace Greenock Police Station and increase police officer numbers in Inverclyde.
Cabinet Secretary Angela Constance.
Presiding Officer, the future of Greenock Station and the custody provision for the area remains under consideration by Police Scotland as part of their wider estates master plan, which we have supported through increasing the capital budget to £70 million. Police Scotland recognises the need for a local policing service for Greenock, while also recognising that the current police station is not fit for modern policing. Decisions on the deployment of police officers are a matter for the Chief Constable. As of 30th September 2025, K Division, which covers Renfrewshire and Inverclyde, had 618 officers. This is 18 more than the previous quarter and 17 more than the same point last year.
Stuart McMillan.
Thank the Cabinet Secretary for that reply. And earlier this year I was informed that the finance was available for a new station, but the clear stumbling block was with the issue with regards to the custody suite capacity, which has been and remains crucial to maintain a fully functioning police station locally. Can the Cabinet Secretary press the Chief Constable to make a decision on the location of a new Greenock police station urgently, as serving officers are working in a facility that is not fit for purpose? And we should also impress on the Chief Constable the need to have more police officers, notwithstanding what the Cabinet Secretary just indicated, operating in Inverclyde due to some of the demands that have been placed on the stretched workforce.
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I very much recognise the members' ongoing diligent advocacy for the concerns to be addressed around the provision of a new police station to serve Greenock and surrounding communities. It is, of course, important that Police Scotland delivers the correct solution for Greenock, which includes appropriate custody provision for the Inverclyde area, as well as delivering on its overall estate master plan to ensure appropriate solutions are delivered for communities across Scotland. However, whilst respecting those operational responsibilities and boundaries, I will raise the members' concern around Greenock Police Station with the Chief Constable at our next meeting, as we regularly discuss the Estates Master Plan, which has identified Glasgow and the west of Scotland as a priority.
Supplementary, Katie Clark.
Glad that the Cabinet Secretary seems to agree that we should have a police station in Greenock. And as she says, one of the concerns being raised is the loss of the custody suite. Does she agree with me more generally that it's important that we continue to have custody suites in local areas? And will she use the opportunity of meeting with Police Scotland to raise that issue, to impress the importance of having local custody suites to reduce the time escorting people when they're taken into custody?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, let me reassure the member that, given my previous and ongoing discussions with Police Scotland, that they have always conveyed to me that it is a key strategic decision as to where custody suites are located. We all know that there won't be a custody suite in every community, but they do have to have the right spread and the right locations across the country for the very practical reasons that the member has outlined.
And supplementary, Jamie Green.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Police Scotland wrote to me to confirm, and I quote, that if the Scottish Government were forthcoming with financial resource, they would direct that investment into a new police station. But that was in December 2023. So the question is, has the Government provided the financial resource, but it's not been delivered by Police Scotland, or has that financial resource that they asked for and need not been forthcoming, and if so, why not?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, Presiding Officer, as I outlined in my original answer, the capital resource that this Government provided to the Scottish Police Authority increased in this financial year. Where Police Scotland deploy that is entirely an operational matter. And of course, right now we are in the midst of planning for the Scottish budget to be announced at the start of the new year. I would, however, point out that the capital allocation from the UK UK Government is far from generous.
Question number 2, Bob Doris.
Thank you, President Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what its position is on whether the legislation that gives the Lord Advocate discretionary powers to instruct fatal accident inquiries in certain circumstances into the deaths of persons normally resident in Scotland who die overseas is operating as intended.
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government considers the legislation is operated as intended. It does provide the flexibility for an investigation and an FEI into the death of a person ordinarily resident in Scotland where the death occurs out with the UK. Its purpose is to allow an FEI where the Lord Advocate considers it appropriate and in the public interest. Fatal accident inquiries into deaths overseas were always expected to be rare, and none have been held since 2017. Significantly, the Act has, however, enabled the Crown Office to conduct inquiries that were not previously possible, including post-mortems and gathering evidence, giving families meaningful answers and reassurance.
Bob Doris.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer, and I acknowledge the Lord Advocate has indicated that the 2016 Fatal Accident Act has allowed various investigative matters to be undertaken following overseas deaths, as the Cabinet Secretary indicated, perhaps post-mortems, perhaps statements from witnesses based in Scotland, and perhaps requesting of information from abroad about the inquiry that has taken place into the findings of investigations there. However, and that's welcome, however, to date, not a single FEI using the Lord Advocate's discretionary powers has taken place. When I campaigned with my constituent, Julie Love, that wasn't what we intended would be the situation. Given that fact, will the Cabinet Secretary outline how they will consider reviewing the impact of the 2016 Act regarding overseas deaths, and in doing so consider whether any legislative or non-legislative improvements could be desirable in the future?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I do want to start by acknowledging the tireless campaign led by Mr Doris's constituent, Julie Love, which was, of course, instrumental in securing the change in the law so that fatal accident inquiries could be held following the death overseas of a person ordinarily resident in Scotland. It is, of course, a discretionary power that rests with the Lord Advocate. This was, at the time, viewed as a historic change, providing that legislative basis for the Crown to investigate and to enable the Lord Advocate to instruct an FEI where the circumstances, in her view, had not been sufficiently established, and that there was a real prospect that an inquiry would do so. And if I can assure Mr Doris that, as with all legislation, and indeed non-legislative measures, this is an issue that is also close to my heart and close to my constituency, that we do keep the law under regular review to ensure it continues to meet its intended purposes and operates fairly and effectively in the public interest.
Supplementary, Liam Kerr.
Thank you. Noting the Cabinet Secretary's position that the legislation in 2016 is operating as intended, as we've just heard, no FAIs into deaths overseas have happened so far. So you've got families like Montrose man Davy Cornick, who for years have been told this is going to be sorted, but nothing's been delivered. So, acknowledging the point just raised, does the Cabinet Secretary believe it may be time for perhaps a committee-led post-legislative review of the 2016 Act to ensure it was and remains fit for purpose?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, that would be a matter for the relevant parliamentary committee, and of course the Government would stand by to give evidence on that as required. In terms of when the 2016 Act was going through this Parliament, it was acknowledged by Lord Cullen, who did the review that underpinned the Act, acknowledged also and evidence given by the Scottish Government, and actually some of the contributions by members in this chamber, that an FEI into a death overseas would be rare. And the reason for that is that there are formidable hurdles without the cooperation of the domestic authority overseas. And of course we can't compel witnesses who are out with the UK to participate, and those formidable hurdles have always been something that I hope I have articulated accurately and fairly to those who have lost, such as Mr Cornick.
And supplementary, Michael Mara.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Things that are rare do happen, Cabinet Secretary, but the Cabinet Secretary has conceded that these fatal accident inquiries do not happen. None have happened. So in a letter to me on 19th November, she said that there are currently no plans to amend that legislation. I think we're making some progress today on the issue that there might be a review. The question is how that should take place. Because the First Minister said to a journalist on the 10th of October that he entirely understands the concerns of my constituent in this area and would want to see those addressed. So perhaps a committee review would be one option, but frankly, what is the government doing in its own time and its own capacity to address this issue of review? It can't be satisfied that this is meeting the needs of ordinary Scots.
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I do accept that rare things do indeed on occasion happen. I'm being very upfront and candid with Parliament that we have no current plans between now and the Parliament rising to review this legislation. It is the case that, irrespective of whether an FEI is permissible under the Act, that there are formidable hurdles which would be difficult for any Parliament to overcome, and that's around the primacy of investigation lying with where the offence took place. Meaningful investigations either by the Crown or Police Scotland are virtually impossible without cooperation of the other jurisdiction. And if I again can reassure members that both as Cabinet Secretary and indeed as a constituency MSP, I have shaken this issue up and down and tried to look at it always. But of course, I do believe we all need to keep an open mind.
Question number 3, Emma Harper.
To ask the Scottish Government, in light of reported protests outside a primary school in Glasgow, what support it is offering to Police Scotland, local authorities and other agencies to ensure the safety and security of those using adult education services.
Minister Siobhan Brown.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. No one in a school community, children, young people, school staff, families or other visitors should experience intimidating or racist behaviour. That is why we are publishing new guidance supporting a whole-school approach to addressing racism and racist incidents in early 2026, which includes guidance on responding to parents, carers and families who experience racism in a school setting. The right to peaceful public assembly and freedom of expression should never be used to justify any form of hateful, violent or otherwise criminal behaviour, and we support Police Scotland to take appropriate action in response to any criminal offences being committed at or around protests.
Emma Harper.
Thank the Minister for that answer. Those not content with intimidating asylum seekers in temporary accommodation and threatening those who offer their solidarity have now turned their attention to primary schools offering ESOL classes. Can the Minister assure me, the Chamber and the communities who are being targeted by those with extreme views that every step will be taken by both Police Scotland and the judicial system to ensure the safety of individuals and guarantee their right to education, and what discussions have taken place with the UK Government about their role in fanning the flames of hatred with their recent rhetoric?
Minister.
Thank you. Absolutely. There's no place for prejudice or discrimination or racism in Scotland, and a message this was reinforced by the First Minister at the Scottish Trade Union Congress, St Andrews Day, March and rally to stand up against racism at the weekend, where he committed that this government to tackle prejudice, root out racism and leave no community marginalised, isolated or vulnerable. I'm sure the member will be pleased to hear the Scottish Government and the STUC has launched the United Workplaces project, backed up by £200,000 of government funding to support trade unions to promote equality and diversity in the workplace, challenge discrimination and build stronger links with communities. And I will ask the Minister for Equalities to write to the member regarding conversations with the UK Government.
Supplementary, John Mason.
Thank you very much. As the Minister probably knows, the Dalmarnock Primary School is in my constituency. Can she confirm that parents going into school to visit the teachers, visit the schools, do ESOL classes, do not need to be part of the PVG scheme, and parents should be able to access all schools?
Minister.
My understanding is yes, that's correct.
Question number 4, Douglas Ross.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government for what reasons it is choosing not to answer any questions on the court proceedings in relation to its policy on transgender prisoners, which allows biological male prisoners to be housed in the women's prison estate, despite the Supreme Court's recent ruling In light of despite the Supreme Court's recent ruling, and in light of Section 5 of the Contempt of Court Act 1981, allowing matters of general public interest to be discussed.
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, it is the Scottish Government's long-held position that it is inappropriate for the Scottish Ministers to comment on live court proceedings. In all cases, we have an obligation to uphold the independence of the judiciary. We do not want the Government to ever be seen as interfering in the work of our independent courts. The appropriate forum for discussions on live litigation is in the court, and that ensures that the proper respect is afforded to the judiciary and also to the litigants.
Dr. Ross.
Well, the Cabinet Secretary speaks about respect. Where is the respect if her and her government are going to court to demand that biological men should still be housed in women's prisons when the Supreme Court ruling was crystal clear? They should respect the Supreme Court ruling. And let's be very clear. This is not part of a long-standing convention. The First Minister said outside of this chamber that legally he wasn't able to speak. That was also the position of the Cabinet Secretary, but we had to get the actual reason from their special advisers and press spokespeople who say it is a decision by ministers choosing not to do this rather than being legally barred. So can they finally find a backbone and tell us exactly why they're taking this to court and be honest with the public who want answers why taxpayers' money is being used to defend the Scottish Government's position rather than respecting the Supreme Court judgment?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, it is the long-held position of the Scottish Government, which also mirrors the UK Government, past and present, that it is inappropriate to comment on live court proceedings. In terms of the more general point that Mr Ross makes around compliance with the law, as a public body, the Scottish Prison Service, as our ministers, are required to comply with the Equality Act 2010 and other legislation, and SPS are clear, as are Scottish ministers, that we need to uphold the rights of all individuals while they are in custody.
And supplementary, Polly McNeill.
Until the Scottish Prison Service recognises the Supreme Court ruling on the meaning of sex in the Equality Act, it is contrary to complying with that decision. But it means that it will implement a policy that it will assess those with a history of violence to manage at their discretion. I mean, already we've seen the Girl Guides today and the Women's Institute have complied, so why not the Scottish Prison Service? But I ask the Scottish Government today what mechanisms are in place to monitor and review the current application of SPS policy on the admission of transgender prisoners to women's prisons, and will the Government publish data on how often that policy has been applied?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I'll certainly look at the detail of Ms McNeill's question, but I would hope that she could be, at least in the short term, reassured that right across government that there is a very clear commitment to comply with the law. That includes equality legislation. The Government has clearly stated that it accepts the ruling from the Supreme Court, and as previous updates have been given by other colleagues, there is a breadth and depth of work to review policies and practices across the piece. That is obviously applicable to the justice system as well, and work has already taken place, for example, with Police Scotland on their interim code on stop and search, and there's been a change to guidance in schools and also with gender representation on public boards.
Question number 5, Michelle Thompson.
To ask the Scottish Government what it considers to be an acceptable risk of harm as defined in the Scottish Prison Service policy on the admission of transgender women to women's prisons.
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, when placing a transgender person within the estate, SPS adopts an individualised approach to assess and manage all known risks that support the health and well-being of everyone living and working within our prisons. The operational guidance states that a transgender woman will only be considered for admission into the women's estate and where, and I quote, she does not meet the violence against women and girls criteria, and there is no other basis to suppose that she poses an unacceptable risk of harm to those housed in the women's estate. That does not mean there is any acceptable risk, but all risks are assessed and considered how best to be managed within a prison setting. SPS manage some of the most complex and vulnerable people in our society, and I both recognise and appreciate the unique skills and wealth of operational experience that they utilise daily to keep our prisons safe.
Michelle Thompson.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response, but firstly, can I just put on the record that this policy is about placing biological men in women's prisons. Risk has two components. First, the chance of harm, and second, the nature of that harm. Most violence against women goes unreported. A male prisoner may have been convicted for certain offences, but any other history is not known. Does this constitute an acceptable risk? Many women in prison suffer from trauma caused by male violence. Does fear and anxiety, halted recovery or re-traumatisation constitute an acceptable risk? Does the removal of a female prisoner's right to safety, privacy and dignity constitute an acceptable risk? Unless the Government is happy to tolerate harm to women, it must inform the Scottish Prison Service to remove this notion of acceptable risk of harm from its policy. Even better, they should surely be told to obey the law as confirmed by the Supreme Court.
Cabinet Secretary.
Signing officer, I'm not going to repeat answers that I gave to other members earlier, but again, can I clearly state that there is an obligation that all known risks must be considered and assessed. And the point about unknown risks was a matter that was reflected in the change to admissions procedures as part of the policy, because it was recognised that when prisoners had been admitted to prison, that the organisation can be time and information poor. And there are additional layers of assurance to manage risk. Decisions about risk are taken by risk management teams. They ensure decisions are evidence-based, that they are focused on public protection and safety. They are multidisciplinary and they bring together expertise so that there can be a reliability in decisions that are very much focused on keeping everyone safe.
And brief supplementary, Sharon Dowie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Supreme Court ruling was clear and men should not be in women's prisons. But will the Cabinet Secretary outline what review mechanisms are in place once an individual is transferred into the female estate? In particular, how are any emerging risks identified and acted upon, and what criteria would trigger any reassessment or removal from the women's estate?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, as I've intimated, SPS have formal risk management processes with partners, and they utilise their experience of managing risk when placing a transgender person with known factors such as convictions and behaviours, past, present and pending. They are all assessed. And where SPS do not feel as though they have received sufficient information about a transgender's individual's history or past behaviours, this is also taken into consideration to inform appropriate placement.
Question number 6, Craig Hoy.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what discussions it has had with Police Scotland on the illegal use of adapted e-bikes and e-scooters.
Minister.
Presiding Officer, ministers and officials regularly meet with Police Scotland and others to discuss the impact of the illegal use of e-bikes and e-scooters on local communities and the powers available to tackle this crime. This has informed action, including our campaign encouraging anonymous reporting through Crime Stoppers through the summer, and Minister Jim Fairley and myself have also met with His Majesty Chief Inspector of Constabulary regarding this issue 2 weeks ago, and we continue to engage on this UK Government, which has the powers relating to off-road vehicles, including vehicle licensing.
Craig Hoy.
In recent weeks, I've knocked on doors in towns including Dumfries, Annan and Lockerbie, and residents have repeatedly raised concerns about the illegal and growing use of e-scooters and souped-up e-bikes on roads and on pavements. In Annan, one elderly constituent said she was scared to leave her house in case she was involved in a collision with youth often clad in hoodies or balaclavas. These concerns are shared by Police Scotland and by the Royal Society for the Prevention of Accidents, with whom I recently met to discuss this problem. Will the Minister now ensure that the police in Dumfries and Galloway have the funding, the manpower and the support to tackle this mounting problem before someone is killed?
Minister.
Thank you. Yes, I am actually aware of Dumfries and Dumfries Community Policing Unit. They were out recently leafleting the residents about the dangers of e-scooters. Yes, we support Police Scotland and its partners in dealing with the misuse of vehicles. Last week, Police Scotland did confirm that anyone found riding a non-compliant e-bike or e-scooter on public road is likely to have it seized by officers. I think it's very important to highlight that this year we have increased police funding to £1.64 billion, an increase of £90 million to support police capacity and capability. And I do note that Mr Hoy did not support that budget or vote for that.
Question number 7, Sue Webber.
Presiding Officer, to ask the Scottish Government how it plans to respond to the reported increase in antisocial behaviour and criminality associated with people using e-bikes.
Minister.
Thank you. As I said earlier, our focus is on supporting police to tackle this issue effectively. Enforcement is a matter for Police Scotland, and local policing teams are best placed to identify misuse and work to prevent future incidents. This has an informed action, including a campaign encouraging anonymous reporting through Crime Stoppers. And I was pleased to note last week Police Scotland partnered with the Royal Hospital for Children to launch an awareness campaign urging parents and carers to consider the dangers of e-scooters and e-bikes present before purchasing one for a child this Christmas.
Sue Webber.
I thank the Minister for that response and for the letter also that I received on Monday, some of the content she's used to respond to Mr Hoy and myself this afternoon. Local authorities are already strained trying to provide funding for youth work. Police budgets are stretched, and while I welcome the initiatives and operations local authorities and policing are conducting, gangs and criminals have unlimited resources. Minister, we need more than the occasional police operation. We need a serious plan targeted at this growing threat to public safety on our streets. Will the Minister commit to prioritising this?
Minister.
Thank you. Police Scotland have advised that the current powers under the Road Traffic Act 1988 and the Antisocial Behaviour Scotland Act 2004 are sufficient to respond to the misuse of off-road vehicles. I know the member has attended several of our meetings in the last year and is aware of all the work that the Minister Fairley and myself are doing. I just did want to highlight this really good example that is going to the committee at Edinburgh Council tomorrow that the member might be aware of, and it is where the council officers have proposed a targeted package of actions to address misuse of quad bikes, dirt bikes and other non-compliant vehicles, and this is going to be run with a cross-agency community interest partnership with Police Scotland, deploying mobile CCTV in hotspot areas. So we know that this problem is across Scotland, but it's very different from rural areas to cities, and I think this is a really good example, if it is approved, how other local authorities can follow suit.
Thank you, Minister. And with apologies to those members I was not able to call, including the question 8, but we have run out of time and I need to protect the rest of the afternoon's business. And that concludes portfolio questions on justice and home affairs. There will be a very short pause before we move on to the next item of business. Thank you.